This is the story of the Mercedes 190e 2.5 16 Evo 2. So that car looks mad, right? But how did sensible Mercedes go from making this to this? Well, it starts with one of the company's best known platforms, the W201. W201 was Mercedes' internal code for the platform that would go on to form the basis of the 190 series of cars. It was famously over-engineered, with Mercedes claiming to have spent £600 million developing the platform, an investment that the company itself admits was probably somewhat superfluous. However, it resulted in one of the automotive world's strongest and best loved platforms. Development took place throughout the late 70s and into the early 80s, and by 1982 they were ready to put their new, smaller sedan into production. I could tell you all the little details and different variations of the 190 that Mercedes made over its more than 10 years in production, but I know why you're here, so let's talk about racing. Clearly, there were some people at Mercedes who were bored by the 192, so in 1983, the sporty, Cosworth-tuned 190e 2.3 16V was unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show. As the lengthy and rather digit-heavy name would suggest, the car now had a 16-valve 2.3-litre inline-4, which, with the extra Cosworth bits, made around 186 horsepower. This was about 50 horsepower or so more than the standard car, and this wasn't just for the sake of it. The appetite for racing these cars was strong. The 190e 2.3 16V with its pokey Cosworth engine was all the encouragement a small team at AMG needed to go out in search of racing glory. The Deutsche Tourenwagen-Meisterschaft had stoked the German sporting spirit, drawing in teams and manufacturers from far and wide to fight it out on track and prove who really made the best cars. By the mid-80s, it looked on track to become more than just a little regional series. Mercedes had been eyeing up DTM for a while, and they knew that an 8-valve 2.3-litre engine wasn't going to cut the mustard against their rivals, especially as the competition progressed. The Cosworth partnership was an effort to put a strong performance engine into series production, therefore homologating it for use in DTM. AMG were asked to work their magic and partnered with Marco RSM, the personal racing team of Helmut Marko, a name you'll certainly recognise if you follow Formula 1, to turn the new sportiest available version of the 190e into a serious race car, capable of serious results. It's worth mentioning at this point that DTM operated under the Group A touring car regulations, meaning that the race cars had to be pretty closely related to a road car, of which at least 500 examples had been produced.
Then they gave it a name, the Mercedes-Benz 2.316, and the rest is performance history, or soon will be.
The championship also doled out penalties to keep racing close. The 2.3-litre Cosworth inline-4 wasn't bad by any means, but in road car trim it only produced around 186 horsepower. With a tune-up and some racing-specific parts, as well as racing modifications to the rest of the car, the 190e 2.3 16V was ready to be let out onto the track. First competing in 1986, the 190e quickly proved to be a competitive machine, with Marco RSM driver Volker Wiedler claiming a race win at the Nürburgring in round 3, ahead of championship leader Kurt Thieme and his V8 Rover Vitesse. This was followed by a second win for Wiedler at Avis, and despite not winning another race that year, of the remaining 5 rounds, Wiedler managed second place in 3 of them, securing second place in the championship overall behind Thieme. For a debut season, Mercedes had knocked it out the park. For 1987, the hope was to carry that momentum forward and ideally achieve even better results. Unfortunately, fate had other ideas. Marco RSM entered 3 190e 2.3s into DTM, however, the best finish any of them could manage was 3rd place in the opening round. It was downhill from there, with the highest championship finish being 9th place for Jörg van Ommen. Mercedes had been roundly beaten by both BMW and Ford. Something needed to change. In 1988, the championship's format was changed, moving from the traditional 1 race on a Sunday model to 2 races per weekend. one on Saturday and one on Sunday. While the races were relatively short, generally 55 minutes, the double-header format certainly delivered the action. A number of teams campaigned the 190E 2.3 in DTM, including BMK Motorsport, Jet Racing, Snowbeck Racing, AMG, and of course Marco RSM for the third time. However, the results weren't flooding in. A couple of podiums in the first few races were appreciated before the second race at the Nürburgring in round 3 saw a victory for Danny Snowbeck in a 190E 2.316, who then won again at the following event, again in the second race in Czechoslovakia. This was already pretty good, but was followed by a double win for AMG's Johnny Cecotto at Avis. Then the Ford Sierra RS500 set about destroying the next few races, with only BMW seemingly able to hold a candle to them, and even that was only after Ford was dished out an intake restrictor to slow their beast down. There was one last hurrah for Mercedes in 1988 though, as Cecotto took another double win at the Hungaroring, taking advantage of the fact Ford and BMW had neglected to properly scope out the new track. Despite the strong performance from Cecotto, Klaus Ludwig and the almighty Sierra reigned supreme that year. But behind the scenes, the wheels were turning at Mercedes. They had come so close to success and were determined to prove that the three-pointed star was worthy of gold. The 2.3-litre engine just wasn't providing the punch Mercedes needed to take the fight to BMW's M3 and Ford's scary Sierra, even with the latter's restrictions. And so for the next generation, the engine would instead be 2.5 litres. In road car trim, the new engine was pushing 197 horsepower, a number everyone knew was far less than what it would be capable of on the track. The new 2.5-litre engine had replaced the old 2.3-litre unit by the end of 1988, but it was only the first step. In March of 1989, Mercedes unveiled their grand plan. Shown at the Geneva Motor Show, the car was clearly a 190E, but it had some not so subtle changes. It of course boasted the new 2.5-litre engine, but it also had wider wheel arches and a new rear wing. Keener onlookers who took a look inside the car may have spotted a switch in the cabin used to control the ride height, revealing significant upgrades to the suspension setup, and they had also upgraded the brakes. The car was the 190E Evolution, and with 502 road-going versions manufactured, it was time to race. The car hadn't been ready for competition from the start of the season, meaning that the handful of Mercedes teams, including AMG themselves, would have to start the year with the old spec car. Klaus Ludwig, who AMG had poached from Ford to capitalise on his championship-winning form, had managed to pick up a race win at Hockenheim for AMG in the old car, but early in the season that's about as good as the news got for the Mercedes runners until the Evo was unleashed in round 4. Roland Asch won the round's first race in the new car for Jet Racing, before Kurt Thiem won the second race with the old car. It's good to know the new car had winning potential, but losing to the machine that it was supposed to replace was perhaps a shaky start. The next couple of races weren't much to write home about for any of the Mercs, until Kurt Thiem, now also behind the wheel of new Mercedes machinery, took victory at the first Norrisring race. At defaults, the Evo really showed what it could do, with Ludwig claiming a double victory at the event, before claiming a second double victory in a row at the next round hosted at the Nürburgring. The Mercedes had finally come into its own. Despite the strong form late in the season, however, Ludwig only claimed enough points for 11th place in the championship, with the best performing Mercedes driver being Kurt Thiem, who managed 4th in the championship. He was rewarded for his consistency. For Mercedes, this simply wasn't good enough. They needed to do better. They needed to win. Before the 1989 championship had even ended, Mercedes was toiling away on the Evo 2. Unveiled at the 1990 Geneva Motor Show, exactly 1 year after its predecessor, the Evo 2 was everything bold about the Evo 1, taken to the extreme. The engine produced 15% more power. The body kit, designed by Richard Epler at the University of Stuttgart, had gotten wider and more aggressive, and the rear wing had grown to simply preposterous proportions. An entertaining anecdote from the time suggests that the chief of R&D at BMW remarked that, quote, "The laws of aerodynamics must be different between Munich and Stuttgart, and that, quote, if that rear wing works, we'll have to redesign our wind tunnel." It's been suggested that BMW did in fact redesign their wind tunnel shortly afterwards. Despite the Evo 1's less than perfect overall performance, the hype around the Mercedes program meant that it was rumoured all 502 road-going Evo 2s had been sold before they'd even shown the car off at Geneva. And you know what happened next? They took it racing. DTM tinkered with the rules going into 1990, banning turbos most notably. Mercedes and BMW were unaffected by this, but the Ford Sierra RS 500 and its Cosworth turbo engine were pretty much forced out by the change. From Mercedes' perspective, this meant less competition, although Audi were going to be testing their new car. The 1990 season isn't a fair representation of the Evo 2's performance at all, as factory partner AMG didn't get their hands on the new car until round 7. And it wasn't until round 9 at defaults that the new machinery was able to make a real impact, with Kurt Team winning the first race of the weekend. Unfortunately for Mercedes, the remaining 2 races were absolutely dominated by Audi's new V8 Quattro driven by Hans Stuck, who won the championship. It had been a forgettable year for Mercedes. 1991 was the first full competition year for the Evo 2, and despite some worries after 1990, it became clear early on that the Evo 2 was a major upgrade. Klaus Ludwig claimed a double win in round 3 at the Nürburgring, proving the Evo 2 had the fight in it to battle against BMW and Audi's super competitive machines. This was followed by some podiums and a win for Kurt Team at Norrisring Race 1, before Ludwig managed another double win at the Nürburgring in round 8. But much like the previous year, the final couple of rounds were dominated again by the immensely strong Audi V8 Quattro, handing championship victory to Frank Biela despite Ludwig's strong performance. Audi seemed a pretty formidable opponent. 1992 was looking like a do-or-die year for Mercedes. It would be the 7th year they had campaigned some variant of the 190E in DTM, only ever achieving silver. But 91's result had instilled hope in Mercedes, their customer teams, the drivers and the fans alike that maybe, just maybe, they could go for gold. Things started well. Kurt Team had moved to Zakspeed to drive one of their 190E Evo 2s, and he won both races in the opening round at Zolder. Roland Asch, in the second Zakspeed Merc, won the second race of round 2 at the Nürburgring. 3 wins in the first 4 races for Zakspeed. Not bad. Round 3 at Wunstorf saw Jörg van Ommen take victory in race 1 for MS Racing's Mercedes outfit before AMG took their first win of the season on Sunday in the hands of Keke Rosberg. Things were getting exciting. Bernd Schneider took victory in race 2 at Avers driving for AMG, then AMG would win again in round 5's first race at Hockenheim in the hands of Ellen Law, who was the first and remains the only woman to have won a DTM championship race. Mighty impressive, but slightly disheartening that she stands alone even 30 years on. Roland Asch would take his second victory for Zakspeed in race 2 that weekend, before Klaus Ludwig would take double victory in round 6 at the Nordschleife. 12 races in, and AMG and Zakspeed were on 5 and 4 wins respectively, all in Mercedes 190E Evo 2s. It looked inevitable one of them would win. Round 7 saw BMW offer some respite from Mercedes' onslaught, and it was also the first race without Audi, who withdrew halfway through the season after scrutineers concluded their new for 92 flat plane crankshaft was illegal. Things were now much closer, and BMW was surely hoping to fight for the title, but the flame of hope was quickly snuffed out, as Klaus Ludwig won both races in round 9, and Bernd Schneider scored another double win in round 10. 4 more wins on the tally for AMG. Schneider won the next race, Ludwig won the following day, and despite a final round to forget with Ludwig failing to finish, the scoresheet had already chosen its winner. Klaus Ludwig, racing for AMG Mercedes, won, the 1992 DTM Championship in a 190e 2.5 16 Evo 2. That name really does never get any shorter, does it? It marked Mercedes' first DTM win at long last, and a win well earned. 1993 was the final year of competition for the Evo 2, where it was beaten, along with all its German compatriots, by the dominant Alfa Romeo 155 Ti V6 of Nicola Larini. DTM's move away from the strict Group A regulations to the freer FIA Class 1 rules meant that newly developed cars, like the Alfa Romeo, were at a significant advantage over cars that had been created for the old rules, taking advantage of the greater freedom to modify their cars more extensively, both mechanically and aerodynamically. For 1994, Mercedes would follow suit, ending 8 years of racing with the 190e. Despite not seeing the level of success that might be typical of a car that achieves legendary status, the 190e Evo 2 is certainly a legend. Why? Well, it could be the number of years it took to find success, it could be the fact it was running with half as many cylinders as the Audi, it could be any number of things. But above all else, just look at it. How could any car enthusiast look at that and not love it? It's bonkers. It's not what we expect Mercedes to do, and to me that makes it very special.